This podcast is about all things related to a disparate community of Americans without a name. We are the AM, A-M-M. A for Arab, M for Muslim, and another M for Middle Eastern, by heritage and American by choice or circumstance. But more importantly, we are separated and alienated from each other. It's time to get in front of the racist PR, clean out the cobwebs, and get to the business of defining ourselves. We are here to elevate AM voices. You ready to hear some tough truths? I am Banafsha Madai-Nejad.
This is Ramesh Dean.
I'm Roy Casagranda, and this is The Defining Moment.
Well, welcome everyone to yet another episode of The Defining Moment. We have an old friend, Dr. Mohan Ambikai Pakar with us today. I'm really, really excited. Mohan, did I mess up the last name? Correct me.
Oh, perfect.
Excellent. So we have so many things we wanna ask you about, Mohan, but I'm at least to begin with, I'm super, super excited to start in a particular place. We talked a little bit. We've talked a little bit about this category, Arab, Muslim, and Middle Eastern, and the boundaries of the category, and I'm. Perhaps by way of introducing yourself, you could also tell us what you think about the category in general.
Well, I'm Malaysian in terms of my nationality. I'm a resident in the United States. I have not taken up U.S. citizenship, even though I've been eligible for many, many, many years. Continue to be Malaysian because I'm very politically, intellectually still invested and engaged with Malaysia. And Malaysia doesn't recognize dual citizenship. So if I was to become a US citizen, in some sense, I would lose, it wouldn't necessarily mean the end of it, but I haven't been able to make that decision because that it involves having to choose. So, and it's important for me to have my Malaysian citizenship in order to share in the risks of engaging in that politics along with other Malaysians as well. It's very difficult to say things when you don't also then share the risks of being someone who can be impacted by these politics. So for those reasons, I continue to be a Malaysian by passport and nationality. But of course, I live my life. The ground beneath my feet is in the United States, and I engage in the politics, racial, class, gender, everyday politics of my situation. In particular, or specifically here in New Orleans, where I live and teach at Tulane University. But I'm part of the New Orleans community here, which is a predominantly Black community.
So what is it like when you have that encounter in these desi spaces where you have to, at some point, the understanding has to come out that your desi experience, at least historically, at least familially, in the sense of your family history, comes from a very different origin than those sort of tech migrants that have coming in the 90s or in the 1970s or whatever else. How does that encounter take place, and what are the desi spaces that we're cultivating and making in diaspora context in the United States or in Malaysia?
Mm-hmm. I don't participate in the desi cultural spaces anymore because it's too racist. It's too Islamophobic. I don't go to temples. I go to temple when I go back home to Malaysia, but I don't go to temples in the United States because all the temples I've been to have been, characterized by kind of Hindutva sentiments.
Do you have an anecdote where you had this encounter or where this clash came up? Yeah.
When I arrived for graduate school, I had been in the United States. I went back to Malaysia, then I came back for graduate school. And the first Diwali function I went at the University of Texas, Austin, once again, completely shocked at the open, vile Islamophobia that gathering presented. Now, when you have Diwali in Malaysia, which is a Muslim majority country, Diwali is a national holiday, okay, celebrated by the entire country. So the Malay, I mean, of course, they're very complicated ethnic politics, as I alluded to, in Malaysia, but, Diwali is a national holiday, and, it's your turn if you're a person of Indian descent to throw, or Sikh, because Diwali is celebrated by Sikhs as well, to throw open houses, like if you've gone to, what people here call Eid, we will call Hari Raya in Malaysia, you've gone to somebody's Eid party, and then your friends will turn around and go, hey, when's the open house for Diwali? Because you got to pay back. This question of paying back, and so Diwali for me was that. And then you come over here, and in my first, few weeks, it was Diwali, first semester, Diwali happened in the fall semester, my first year in graduate school. And at UT Austin, it was just like a gathering to be anti-Pakistani and anti-Muslim and to crack, vile Islamophobic jokes and comments. And I went up to the organizers to raise it, and they just laughed in my face. There's something like somebody say, oh, he's pro-Pakistani, he's a pro-Pakistani guy. And I'm like, this is not even, you don't know what you're talking about. But all of these spaces, so many of these spaces, had the traditional spaces like, temples or community organizations. When I was a TA at UT Austin, I remember having an Indian Muslim student who was in tears in my office because, the Indian Cultural Association, they just didn't define Indian culture as just being Hindu and only for Hindus. But she carried, her parents were Indian Muslims, obviously, they're like over 100 million, but the cultural organizations on campus just assume that, if you put on a cultural night, that they're just doing it to sort of this reified idea of Hindutva or Hindu, only culture. And we know that that's not true in India. Like, India is not just, a Hindu nation. It's never been only a Hindu nation. And even the term Hinduism is like, a weird construction,
British
so
construction.
there are debates about that, British, Islamic, whatever. But, but nonetheless, I mean, there were vast differences, and huge polemical, religious, militaristic, conflicts between Vaishnavites and Shaivites and Chavarkas, and how many different histories. All of that gets, sanitized and then streamlined into like Hindu versus Muslim, which is very bad history. It's bad history because it's not the accurate history. I mean, it's not like there was a romantic history, but this is really bad history. This one theme, it did not characterize 2,000 years of complicated, stuff, happening, right? It's really bad history. But that bad history is the internalized ideology of Hindutva, right? That sees it in this, Manichaean binary, and has this project of creating a political Hindu community. I mean, they don't actually, at some essence, even at least some of the original founders of this movement didn't even think about it as a religious movement.
This idea that you're Desi, but you're not quite Desi, right? And you're Indian, but you're not exactly the same Indian as other Indians. You're Malaysian, but you're not exactly the same Malaysian as, say, a Muslim Malaysian. So in the United States, we used to have just 3 races. The entire universe was divided into 3 races. We've now, because, progress, we're now at 5. We've figured out, we almost in 2017 made a 6th race, which I find really fascinating. My understanding of Great Britain is that it's really just a binary. There's white and then there's black and there's not much in between. I feel like from previous conversation with you, it would be really interesting to get you to tease out sort of the lack of nuance that the United States and Great Britain express towards this group of people who don't fit necessarily into those categories.
Well, with the situation in Britain, I don't think that's quite accurate because, like, the black and white schema which was in place was even the schema that the state utilized, in its social policies and things like that, lasted, about, 89, 90, 91, the state slowly abandoned that and became multicultural, so to speak, which is not what progressives actually celebrate. They see that they're seen as a profound breakdown of the powerful Black movements that had been built up in the UK, and in fact was a very clever strategy by the British state to break up the movement. We have certain preconceptions. I had preconceptions before I went and did my fieldwork in the UK about what this Black in the UK meant at the time that it was developed. I think from a US perspective, it means that everybody got given the same identity and there was no nuance and no differences within it. But that was never the question. Black was never utilized in this particular moment and in this particular configuration. It was never seen as being an ethnic identity or a national identity. It was seen as a political identity, a political umbrella that brought together many different people. So nobody expected you to not eat chapatis and dal or speak Hindi in order to be Black. Nobody expected, everybody now is going to do steel pan. Everybody now is going to do reggae. That wasn't, and I think the American idea, when they hear this thing of Black, they think that that's what it was, and therefore it suppressed the ethnic minority voice. No, Black was the umbrella term, the social movement term that enabled people to organize themselves in order to mount a challenge, against racial violence, state violence, so on and so forth, right? And it's still utilized today. The National Union of Students has the Black Students Movement, professional organizations, police officers, even things that you are not quite progressive still continue to use Black in that kind of way, like basically minority. The state has tried to come out with all kinds of convoluted technical sounding terms. There have been so many. I think the current one is BAME, Black and other visible minority ethnics, or some, weird kind of textbooky. Nobody goes around saying, I'm BAM. So it's a failure on that level because it's just this techno speak. But that's I think, believe that right now it is the operating state category, right? But that's not the history of political Blackness, in the UK. And I wrote a whole book about it, and I want to rehash it. But
but I want you to rehash it.
It was, part of it is this. It came about because.
By the way, this is becoming definitely 2 episodes. So I just want to say, because we are an hour and 20 minutes in. So we're definitely going to do 2 episodes. I'm not thinking we might do 3.
I'll leave it to you what you want to use and what you want to use. But to answer Roy's question, you look at the historical formation of the community. So after World War II was when Britain recruits from the colonies, to get the labor it needs to rebuild. Britain is completely destroyed, right? Physically after World War II. So it's not what the U.S. had. U.S. just fought the war outside. Britain itself is completely crushed, right? So it needed massive amounts of infusion of labor to rebuild the transport systems, start all the social welfare programs that it had been promising the people who have been fighting the war, including the NHS. So, where are they going to get all the doctors, all the nurses, all the thing to make good on the promises? So, Jamaican nurses, Malaysian nurses, Pakistani doctors, Indian doctors, the NHS was 40% is staffed by people from...
NHS is National Health System.
The National Health System, which is one of the major projects after World War II. So Britain recruits from its colonies, and that is where these mass migrations begin to happen. Of course, you've had long-standing communities, small communities in Britain for hundreds of years, and presence, going back to the Roman times. But mass settlement happens through these dynamics, after World War II. But as these mass settlements are happening, they're running into racial nationalism. They're running into racism, and people are not wanting the presence of these groups. And politicians are then seeing that being anti-immigrant actually can pay off at the electoral booth. So the beginnings of anti-immigration, anti-black immigration discourses, take place at this point. So there's a contradictory thing. The UK is wanting its colonies and people of the colonies to come, and at this time, as I point out in my book, let's be very clear: they were not migrants, right? People were citizens of the British Empire, and the 1948 British Nationality Act, as was kind of an effort to hang on to the empire, try to reassure everybody in the empire who had not become independent, no, you are British citizens. Here's this new law we proclaim: you are all British citizens. And the 1948 Act, if you are a citizen, it just reasserted what was the fact, because you were a colonized person, you were part of the British Empire, just reasserted it, but also reasserted the fact that because you were a member of the British Empire and a citizen, you were entitled to reside in Britain. So people were not migrating. They were just moving from one, like my grandparents, just moved from one part of the empire to another part of the empire. And so the constructing them as immigrants and then being sort of illegal immigrants or interlopers, that was a result of the development of anti-immigration discourses. So these dynamics affect people from the Commonwealth, the non-white Commonwealth, right, of both Afro-Caribbean, South Asian, Chinese descent. They are all being, subjected to these dynamics. So the grassroots politics that has to emerge in order to fight this is very different in shape. And that's at least one reason. Of course, this is not just automatic. It also has to do with the visions and the political thinking of the people who were there. I mean, there are a lot of connections with, the Black movements in the United States, the visit of Martin Luther King to the UK, the visit of Malcolm X to the UK. These were all important events that give rise to the Black movement in the UK. But when it finally, occurs in the UK, when it takes shape as a Black movement, both the history and the political orientation of people. And you remember used to be a joke when I was doing fieldwork in Britain. It's like all British racial politics is Guyanese. People will say that, and why? Why is that? Why is Guyana? Because you think about Trinidad and Guyana, these were colonies that are largely populated by two big groups, Indians and African descended, people. And so the diasporas in Britain, not just inventing this out of thin air, they were also fighting anti-colonialism. They were doing anti-colonial struggles in Guyana and Trinidad and forging alliance between these groups, to fight British colonialism there. So they arrive in Britain, they see themselves fighting against racism in Britain, not colonial rule, direct colonial rule, but a facet of it, which is this racial animosity and racial violence. And they're also drawing on their anti-colonial political imaginaries to construct, a sort of, like I say, a domestic anti-colonial movement against the facets of imperialism and racism appearing in their experience now inside the metropole of the UK, not in Guyana and Trinidad. So a lot of the key figures who created these movements were from Trinidad and Guyana, people like C.L.R. James, people like Walter Rodney, a very important Sri Lankan figure, A. Sivanandan, and then later in the women's movements as well, and the groups that came out of it. The Southall Black Sisters, for example, was a key feminist movement, the organization of Afro-Asian, unity. It's a feminist group as well. And so all of these groups coalesce, so there are historical conditions that contextualize why it happens. And then there's also the agentive part, the people who carried the political imaginations from their home colonies, where already these dynamics and these populations were already there, the Caribbean has Chinese populations. The Caribbean has Indian population. The Caribbean has African populations. And people fighting for Trinidadian independence, Guyana's independence, are already talking about unity between these groups in order to forge it. So they replicated that. And it happened at the time of the Black Power movement also taking place in the US, and inspirations and connections, tangible, direct connections with Black Panthers and MLK, Malcolm X, all of these kinds of things. So that's what then creates the unique shape, but interconnected. It's not separate, it's interconnected, but also unique shape of the Black Power movement in the UK. And that lasts until, as I said, probably, in the 90s, 90s to 2000s, and it's different today, but it's more fragmented and much more like the US, today in that regard. But this is the history.
So I'm glad you bring this up because, one of the things, and this goes back to the thing, how we started this conversation to begin with, and you said categories, you can kind of try and figure out, I guess, judge them based on what they're trying to do. And one of the reasons why we thought of this category was, first of all, everywhere I was looking in academia, I kept running into Arab, Muslim, Middle Eastern as sort of the way to, capture as many folks in the Islamic world as possible who were living diasporically here in the U.S. So Arab, Muslim, Middle Eastern, and of course a lot of folks don't show up in those three words, or I've met folks who say, well, I just feel invisibilized in when you use those three words. But if we assume that you got to use something short to be able to say that, and if the intention is to be as expansive in that category as possible, as inclusive, as expansive, then the goal of I-AMM as a category was to undo whatever fractures, centuries and centuries of. We're seriously running out of time, so I don't want to get into that discussion. But meddling and map drawing and infighting and all sorts of confusion has caused. So, I'm bringing this up by way of taking us back to the beginning conversation, and also asking, just listening to you, it's become so clear to me personally how I don't know, almost magical Malaysia as a place is.
Then I've done a bad job.
Magical magical.
You're fired.
No. I am magical in the sense of, I just get hopeful when I hear examples of folks still holding on to a semblance of what it was like to, what it's like to live in spaces that hold a lot of ambiguity and hold a lot of diversity and are open, and that's the goal for this for this organization, at least.
Because I think that this process of sort of reification and casting, for example, Indianness as a particular kind of Indianness that requires a particular, male Hindu kind of subject, this romanticizing or recasting of history, for some reason that process seems so much easier and readily accessible within a diasporic context. And so that's where my fear comes up, is that on the one hand, I guess for me, I'm talking from a Pakistani context. Pakistan needs a certain kind of subject for Pakistan to exist. It needs a certain kind of history for Pakistan to exist. While that history and that subjectivity and all that stuff can take place in the nation still has space to accommodate to continue to accommodate the sort of syncretic actual practices of people on the ground. So, for example, the lower classes can do whatever the hell they want. They can practice whatever the hell kind of Islam or Hinduism they want, and the state is still able to sustain itself. There's something about being in diaspora that makes that sort of reification much more easier, or maybe it requires that reification in order to continue to maintain that identity to homeland.
I mean, it also has to do with the class interests of the people, say, like the diaspora in the U.S., right? I mean, a lot of people, when I talked, back in the years, there's so much of, a lot of people who are Brahmins or upper castes, who access this privileged IIT, medical school, these things, they're very resentful of the affirmative action policies.
But IIT is Indian Institute of Technology.
Yeah, I mean, this is where, my Silicon Valley draws. It's like, Liverpool and things like that. And also these people are very ignorant. They're like science people who have been given this kind of, modern colonial education, completely, in a sense, deracinated. Deracinated in the sense that they don't really have a very in-depth link, as a part of their hyper-technical education. They actually don't have training in humanities or social science to be able to deal with, ambiguity, complexity, all the kind of things that we've been talking about, the strange vicissitudes of history, these are all things that they don't. But it seemed that they were needing, as immigrants in the United States, some kind of anchor, to both articulate their privilege and their class interests, as well as sort of fill in, kind of cultural gaps, maybe because of the pressures of assimilation and whatnot in the United States. So, Hindutva is also an example of that. I'll give you a very down-home example. When I was in college, my initial political organizing and work when I was at Swarthmore College as an undergraduate, I was involved in the movement against Proposition 187 at that time, the anti-immigration laws, that were sweeping the country. And then I was also a member of the Black Cultural Center, actually, the Asian organizations, the Swarthmore Asian organization existed in the kind of pan-ethnic Asian way, but with a heavy East Asian emphasis. There was no South Asian organization. And when the South Asian organization was created, I was appointed vice president even without asking, because there were just so few people there. But I wasn't actually doing much work with the South Asian organizations. I was involved in the Black Culture Center. I was involved in the anti-immigration efforts on campus. And when the South Asian organization eventually put on their first event, it was like the Ram Leela, and like a Diwali or something, like showcasing their cultural, their culture, and of course in that act, people like Dylan Rodriguez and all, and my friend Nazia has also written books about like Muslim politics on campus and student politics on campus, and they essentialize, right, or they create this identity about Indianness or South Asianness, that very much draws on very narrow definitions, like why is the Ram Leela all of a sudden canonized as the emblem to launch your South Asian organization? And you're not fighting against racism, you're not, allied against anti-Blackness, but it's about trying to show your cultural chops on campus. You still see it every season, right? the cultural show, thing where you self-exotify yourself and you try to impress other people that you're not assimilated and you come from this like ancient proud culture, that stretches 5,000 years as a sort of bargaining chip, against white supremacy, something like that, right? And so the politics are coming into visibility, representation. We think we need representation, but I've always seen representation as a double-edged sword. I didn't see myself represented in the Ram Leela for so many reasons. First and foremost, the Diwali story isn't even about Ram in Malaysia. And it isn't even about the Ram and Ayodhya and the destruction of Babri Masjid Mosque and everything like that. It isn't even about Ram. In the south of India, for Tamils, it's Krishna that's the hero in the Diwali story. So even so I was like, Ram, who's this dude? Ram. In all my years of being Malaysian and Indian and Hindu, like I've never ever come across this Ram or Ram Leela, but I'm being told now that this is my culture, and I'm being represented, and so we must be always careful. And of course, that was also the moment of reifying, or articulating South Asian identity. Why wasn't there, Islamic Indian culture? I mean, like, hello, India, Hindustan. India wouldn't exist without the notion of Hindustan. The notion of Hindustan is a Mughal invention. It's just like, why did we do Ram Leela? Because this Hindu thing was already in the imaginations of the second generation kids that were coming in. And they're like, we are alienated. We don't have political spaces. We want our own category. We want our own organization. And then in the process of representing themselves, they also create erasures, invisibilization, hierarchies, violence, exclusion of Muslims. So representation is always a double-edged sword, right? I think it's much clearer, to base your fight in the struggle against injustice and just representation. Like what I see, when we used to lament there are no brown faces on TV. Oh my God, we have so many brown faces now on TV.
And I hate it.
Exactly. Have you felt enlivened by all these representation?
Well, the problem with all the brown faces on TV is that now we're competing.
It's not just competition. It's just not like, one group.
Oh, it might not just be competition, but competition is there. And one of the things when you say representation is a double-edged sword, and I get it, I think. And that the focus should be, fighting for just causes. But this is really, I just don't know how to fight for a cause if all the people I can ever talk to are just Iranian Americans, and most of them are asleep at the wheel because they're so busy assimilating. Right?
Well, assimilating.
And then hold on, let me finish this thought.
Professionally.
Yeah, all of the ways, right? And then when I'm talking to Arabs, I'm just an Iranian, right? And then when Arabs are talking to each other, they're either Syrian, Lebanese. We're different. We don't talk to Egyptians.
We're
Yeah, it's like we are so fractured. There needs to be numbers. There needs to be organizing. Who do you organize with?
Also, when you guys are going off on how exciting it is, how many brown people are being represented, there's still only Rami Malek for the Arabs. I mean, if every time an Indian represents an Arab terrorist in a movie, I get so excited. I'm like, oh my God, look, there's an Arab presence in a movie. It's true, he's going to blow up a bunch of innocent people, but it's so exciting.
Well, that's my point in essence. I think if we are trying to seek representation within these dominant frames and discourses, and that's the politics we want a place, we
want a means of organizing. We want a context, a basis.
I don't think you need. I hear you, Banafshe, on one level, because I've grappled with that issue as well. As I said, being a Malaysian, in America, if I was to base my politics on being able to gather number, it'll be myself and myself in New Orleans, and I will have an organization that represents me. Right. So partly because of that, maybe I haven't, and when I've sought to explore other avenues, as I said, I suppose because of the way I look, my name and cultural similarities, I could have absorbed myself in the Hindutva project. I mean, how many great dosa meals I could be enjoying in nice Hindutva settings right now. I haven't had dosas, I haven't gone to those places where I could be I love Indian weddings, haven't been invited to one, but those kinds of things.
I'm with you. I am so with you there.
So, I think those are important though, because you don't have to base your politics on numbers. Sometimes it's worth, I don't have answers. I'm not giving you prescriptions. We have to work these out. And I don't undervalue, what it is that you're pointing towards as cruxes. But I think when we think about models of organizing, even in the literature in Asian American studies, this whole thing about peripheral Asians. And that's maybe what we are. We're peripheral groups in these larger formations. And peripheral groups don't necessarily follow the same mass logics, like a Chinese American
I totally
group
get
or
you.
things like that. So politics can be waged differently, and they also, our margins help us to see things and initiate critiques that people who are so seamlessly included and belonging into these formations, they don't see it. And that could be the role. That could be the role that we play. And small groups are even sufficient. I think what you guys are doing are great. Small groups, you don't have to aspire to become mass. Mass is just a tactic or strategy.
The word margin that you use, that's actually who we are aiming for. We are aiming to bring in folks who don't get invited to weddings in their culture. Yeah. Yes, the cultural periphery in each of these subcultures, the Islamic subculture.
Or I said a coalition of the periphery.
Coalition of the periphery. Thank you. Yes. And
it's worth exploring, for sure. But I don't think the conclusion.
I'll tell you something, Mohan.
Stop resisting. You're a member.
No.
I already told Banafshe, whether or not you accept me, I'm already a part of the Islamic hate world, and
whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
You did not put Southeast Asian in your tag, but I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So this was an argument. We had a huge founding argument, and part of the argument that I was making was the Hindus from Bali are in this group.
Yes, you were making that specific point. That's what he was making.
Well, those of us who are minorities in Islamic hate context.
Absolutely.
These are not, and because we are minorities, we have a very complex relationship. We have a very knowledgeable relationship to Islamic, this thing. We're not just pro or anti. We're working about expanding the feminist interpretations about Quran. We are supporting our LGBTQ folks within, Islamic, cultures. We are looking at, the ways in which minorities and women are constructed in racial Islamicist projects. These are not things that you hear about talked in even the circles of anti-Islamophobia, because that's not where the politics is at. But we bring so much more richness about our politics of engagement. And this is not abstract, right? So, I'm fighting for a Malaysia that is just. And part of that has to be an engagement with Islam, and the politics of Islam as it's unfolding in Malaysia. So, this is not just an academic interest. My academic interest is driven by real life political struggles, and my relationship to Islam is not my relationship, that the relationship people have to Islam, in the West, as it were, right? Like it's different. It's informed differently as well. And when we fight against Islamophobia, that's not even like that's a natural extension of these engagements and origins and politics. It's a natural extension because we can make those links. It's possible to make those links, because we've been minorities inside majoritarian context as well, and so we understand what being a religious and racial minority is like and what's happening to those people. There's another way to go. The another way to go is to identify with the oppressors. So if you've been marginalized in one context, then you can come here and get fed by Islamophobia. And this is the kind of political work that we have to do, and I try to do within the Malaysian context, is to not allow that to be the solution, like not allow Islamophobia to be the solution to what minorities are legitimately facing as oppression within, the state Islamization projects, and it's not just me, but many other people as well are trying to fight for, a different kind of world, and this fight that we do makes us a part of the Islamicate world, and it's not new. I mean, some of the greatest things written in the Islamicate world have been written by non-Muslims and things like that. So this is not exactly new, but it has a modern, present day guise to it. But it's okay to have these groups. The question I guess I would ask you, to think about is that the end goals of these groups maybe don't have to be modeled on the social movements and the groups of the past. For example, seeking inclusion or seeking representation. Maybe that is not even the necessity.
No, our goal is tackling racism amongst ourselves and being able to, in the process, learn, or at the same time, learn about our own anti-Blackness and to be able to link up with, for instance, what's going on right now. I don't go look at comments that are made by Iranians right now because I will feel like I want to punch the wall. I just don't go there. It just dissipates my energy. It just drives me insane.
For listener context, we're recording this on June 7th. Yeah. So this is very much focused on racism. And a lot of it is racism within our subgroups, and which is one of the, I believe at this moment, I don't care historically how we got here, at this moment, what's sustaining the fractures to a large extent.
But what is the
racism?
What is the unity for?
We're not thinking of unity. I mean, if that comes, that's great. Right now, it's mostly, the unity is for just being able to wake up to what we're thinking about, how we're thinking about it. What is our role here? As if we want to be Americans, then what the hell is our role, especially in the context of there is a literal race war going on right now.
No, I see it as a liberation struggle. It's not a race war. Nobody's fighting races. They're a liberation struggle.
Great. Liberation struggle. On our side, it is a liberation struggle.
On the other side, though,
on the other side, it's definitely a race war on their side. But on our side, it's absolutely a liberation struggle. And so, but so many of our people are on the wrong side, kidding themselves about how this is going to end or what their role is, or I don't know. They're not quite aware of what reality is.
So I think, stuff like that, if that is if that's the political issue, then that seems really clear. That seems really
it is very clear.
Then the project of I-AMM is to attack that very specifically identified issue. Then when you have the reason for the identity. So the politically black identity, for example, in the UK, one could argue that it outlived its purpose. When the historical moment, it was a long historical moment, at least like half a century of it, like kind of, maybe moved on to a new conjuncture, and new kinds of issues and forces came into play. There are all kinds of things that changed the context, that made that identity, unviable. One was the attacks, by the state that didn't like that identity and wanted to break it up. Then there are other kinds of issues also that came up, and maybe that identity has outlived its purpose. Maybe it'll come back again. Like every time you think, as a scholar, and I think that's it, it's over. And another 2 years, something happens in political blackness and comes back again. So in Britain, it doesn't seem like they have completely accepted it or completely dispensed with it. So far as I observe, even after my book, there's been like eruptions of political blackness, debates about it, and then goes away, and then comes back again, and goes away. That's Britain anyway, right? So, but maybe
I want that here.
Yeah, but that identity, but that's a contextual thing. That's a historical thing. Blackness in the United States, is anchored to the, is centered on the historical experiences, of slavery, and slavery here. Britain didn't do slavery, not exactly in plantation slavery anyway, inside its territory, right? Inside its homeland, as it were, but mother country. But they did it outside in the colonies. Those are significant differences. Really important differences that also lead to different meanings. But here, we are centered, we are marked by the fact that plantation slavery, was very much the social organization that's at the root of so many of our institutions, so many of our political orders, so many of our social orders. It's right in here. It's there, and we have to relate to that. So if that category acquires a certain kind of centeredness, then there is a reason for that centeredness. Right? There's a reason for that centeredness, historically.
No, I really like that you're bringing this up. This is really, really, really useful. Yeah.
And so the thing is, then what is your relationship to that? I mean, it's just that it doesn't have to be a alienated relationship. I think, for non-Black people of color.
To what specifically? Relationship to what specifically?
Relationship to American Blackness.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's obviously going to vary dramatically from person to person, but so when I was an undergrad, I was in the African American Book Club. And the reason it wasn't because of my skin color or anything like that, but because of all the groups, like the Arab student group and the Palestinian student group and all the different groups that I could have gone to, and I did, and I tried them out. The African American Book Club was the one group where I felt most at home, because the politics that they were talking about, the liberation politics that they were talking about, fit me. Whereas, the Arab student group wanted to talk about Islam, and the Palestinian student group, which I liked a lot too, but they were too focused on Islam as well. I wanted to talk about their liberation. I didn't want to talk about religious matters. And so I think at the end of the day, the answer is that it's going to be messy, and it's going to be unclean, and it's not going to be clear. And the identities, the African American experience isn't going to fit. Like, I can't claim to be African American even though my mother was born in Africa, right? It doesn't quite fit, but that closeness that I have to that movement makes an alliance, or at least makes me feel strongly connected to them, natural.
Yeah, and you can build connections. You don't have to inherit. You don't get connections by heritage. Only you can build your connections. You can make the connections. I mean, I teach a Blacks and Asians class, and one of the things that we have explored is the fact that, I mean, in all the formations in African American struggles, there have been people of non-black, descendant, non-blacks who are participating in it. Black Panthers, one of the founding members was, Richard Aoki, who was a Japanese American. Like there were, people like Grace Lee Boggs, who was part of the struggles, where was she now? In Michigan, and Yuri Kochiyama, is another example of a person. People built connections that didn't. Once again, I think somehow So what you did makes perfect sense to me. It doesn't mean that we become African American. It means that we build, like with labor, our connections, as Malaysians to the African American struggles, so on and so forth. There's a wonderful metaphor, and I was involved in the solidarity struggles with the Zapatistas, in the early 2000s, right? And, part of these delegations that went down to Zapatista held territories, Chiapas, and there's different camps. There was a beautiful example of revolution. We did several things. And one of them was, we appropriated the revolution already appropriated all of these mansions, these haciendas, that were owned by the landlords, and they were turning the mansions into schools. And, we actually helped to build the desks and the chairs and people who came, people came to stay with us in Austin, who developed with the assistance of people in UT Austin, academic programs and things like that. They developed the language materials for teaching in the indigenous languages, in Celtal, on our dining table. I'm not indigenous, I'm not indigenous person from Chiapas, but we built solidaristic links, and we enable things to happen. Like, as I said, the Celtal language primary school textbooks were written on our dining table, and when this couple who was involved in this project, when they left, they had a Volkswagen Bug, and they were needing school materials and supplies. And it was actually an AISD teacher who liberated the AISD storage room, of school supplies, and loaded up a trailer full of papers and pencils and notebooks and color pencils and crayons and this and that. And this bug and this trailer, took it all back to Chiapas to start the school. So why does it have, like you are a part of that? It doesn't make me less Malaysian. My Malaysianness has now become inflected through my connection to the struggle, and when I went to Chiapas, met with the communities, did a presentation over there and things like that, and where I was actually talking about the racial and social struggles of Malaysia. They had a auditorium that had been hand built, out of wood and everything like that, sitting on the slope of a hill with benches inside. And we went in, and I was going to give this like slide presentation on this like canvas sheet and talk about things that just like exchanging stories about struggles from around the world. And I thought maybe one or two people would show up. Malaysia is such a odd thing. Nobody takes courses in American universities on Malaysia anyway. Right? That's what they assume. And it's like, who's going to come in the middle of Chiapas to listen to some talk on Malaysia? When the sun went down and they rang the bell, all of a sudden, everywhere in these rural communities, people started coming out of their homes and ended up inside the auditorium. And it was full. It was completely full. And they took an interest in the struggles of indigenous people and social struggles in Malaysia, and we exchanged all of this. I spoke in English; it was translated into Spanish. That was translated into Celtal, and then we did this stuff, right? I say all of this because at the end of this, then we were invited to have like a kind of ceremonial tea, with the community and things like that. And in the toast, one of the leaders, Zapatista's leaders, said, okay, today we inaugurate the connection between, our communities and our peoples, and one day we will dig a tunnel from Chiapas to Malaysia. Right? So you build the connections by the work that you do. You build the connection. That's not in the history. There is no chapter in Malaysian history that talks about Malaysian connection to Chiapas. You know what I'm saying? We're just bounded by what's our heritage telling us we should do. But no, the Malaysian heritage is about, has a liberation story in it. And if you can build your liberation story, even if you're just one person, to other liberation stories, then you will find the reciprocity. I firmly believe it, but, I didn't go there to just belong to their struggle, but I went there to be in solidarity with them and to assist in ways that they found useful. And what we did was the school project, right? To assist in that and the educational project. But that now means that the Malaysian connection to Chiapas has a chapter, and we have written that chapter, and so we can do this. We can do this with the African American struggle. We can do this with the other struggles. We can write the new heritage. We don't have to be bound by what has happened or what has not happened in the past. We can build the new bridges. We can make this thing, and that's the politics that I think we can do. And any category, if there's a category that wants to, inaugurate itself in order to do work like this, why not? But if you're just seeking representation in Hollywood, or whatever.
Okay, yeah, that really was the initial drive.
Then yeah, okay, then we can be here all night long, and it will be just like whatever, But you don't have to be limited, like you can have a category.
Ever is hearing it. We're putting it out there in the world. Well, on that note, Mohan, thank you so much for your time, for your brilliance, for all the work that you do. And we'll be knocking on your door.
Especially now that you've volunteered to make this connection between us and other groups.
We're going to make a tunnel from Austin.
Right. to New Orleans. Why? We already have so many New Orleans refugees still here.
Well, this is a wonderful journey for you guys, and thanks for including me as part of that conversation and journey.
Yeah, thank you for all the insights. Thank you for being here and joining us. I'm Banafshe Madani-Nejad. Khuda Hafiz.
This has been Ramesh Nadeem. Adab.
This is Roy Casagrande. Ma salama.
And this is Mohan Ambikai Parker, and Selamat Jalan.